Sign over the house or you'll never see your grandchildren again, my daughter-in-law Jessica said, sliding legal documents across my kitchen table with the casual cruelty of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. Marcus and Sophie already think you forgetting them. We've been telling them grandma doesn't want to visit anymore. How long before they stop asking about you entirely? My son David stood behind her, silent and staring at the floor, the boy I'd raised transformed into a stranger who wouldn't meet his mother's eyes. But why did I remain calm instead of devastated? And why, 6 months later, did I show them a restraining order instead of opening my door when their lives collapsed? You have 3 days to decide, Jessica continued, mistaking my silence for shock. Sign the deed over to us, and we'll let you see the kids on holidays. Refuse, and they'll grow up thinking their grandmother abandoned them. She smiled as she said it, a cold, calculated expression that revealed exactly who I'd been dealing with for the past 8 years. David, I said, looking past her to my son. Is this really what you want? He wouldn't look at me. Mom, it's complicated. We need the equity. The kids need stability. If you I understand perfectly. I stood, gathering the documents they'd brought. I'll have my lawyer review these. Please leave my home. Your lawyer? Jessica laughed. Eleanor, you're 72 years old living on a pension. What lawyer can you possibly afford? The one your threats just paid for. I've been recording this conversation since you walked through my door. This is a one-party consent state. I walked to the front door and opened it. 3 days, you said? I'll be in touch. The look on Jessica's face as that information registered was the first moment of satisfaction I felt in months. The deterioration of my relationship with my son hadn't happened overnight. When David married Jessica 12 years ago, I'd had reservations I'd kept to myself. She'd been charming in a practiced way, attentive to David in public but dismissive in private, and focused on our family's assets with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. My late husband Harold had built a successful plumbing business over 40 years. When he passed 6 years ago, he'd left me financially secure, a paid-off house worth $680,000, retirement accounts, and modest investments. Comfortable but not wealthy. Certainly not worth the scheming that would eventually emerge. Jessica's interest in my finances had grown more obvious over time. You really should downsize, Eleanor. This house is too much for one person. Have you considered a reverse mortgage? You'd have so much more spending money. The kids would love it if you moved closer to us. We could find you a nice apartment. Every suggestion positioned her to access my assets. Every recommendation would have transferred my security into their control. I declined politely for years, watching her frustration grow while David retreated further into whatever private marriage dynamic kept him compliant. The grandchildren had become her primary leverage. Marcus, 10, and Sophie, 8, were the lights of my life. I'd been an active grandmother, weekly dinners, school events, holiday traditions, the kind of relationship I'd dreamed of having with my grandchildren. Jessica had started limiting access 2 years ago. The kids have activities on Saturdays now. Maybe next month. Sophie has a playdate. We'll reschedule. Marcus is going through a phase where he doesn't want to visit. You understand. The excuses accumulated until visits became rare, then rarer, then almost non-existent. Phone calls were monitored. Video chats were inconvenient. The grandchildren I'd helped raise were slowly being erased from my life. I'd tolerated it because I didn't know what else to do. Because I kept hoping David would intervene. Because I couldn't imagine my own son would participate in such calculated cruelty. The ultimatum in my kitchen proved I'd been naive. The recording changed everything. I'd started documenting interactions with Jessica after a lawyer friend suggested it, 18 months before the ultimatum. I hadn't known what I was gathering evidence for, just that something felt wrong, that I should protect myself somehow. The recording of that kitchen confrontation captured every threat clearly. Sign over the house or you'll never see your grandchildren again. We've been telling them grandma doesn't want to visit anymore. Refuse, and they'll grow up thinking their grandmother abandoned them. My attorney, Patricia Holloway, listened to the recording with visible disgust. This is textbook grandparent alienation combined with elder financial abuse, she said. Your daughter-in-law is threatening to weaponize your grandchildren unless you surrender your primary asset. Your son is complicit through his silence. What can I do? They have custody of the children. They can prevent me from seeing them regardless. Not necessarily. Many states have grandparent visitation rights, particularly when there's an established relationship and evidence that the parents are acting against the children's best interests. She made notes. The threats about making the children believe you abandoned them, that's parental alienation. Courts take that seriously. I just want to see my grandchildren. I don't want to destroy my son's marriage. Your son's marriage is destroying itself. He's participating in elder abuse and child manipulation. The question is whether you're going to let them succeed. The legal process took 6 months. Patricia filed for grandparent visitation rights under state law, citing the established relationship and evidence of parental alienation. She also filed a protective order based on the threats and attempted coercion. Jessica's response was predictable: escalation. She told other family members that I was senile, making up accusations, trying to destroy her marriage out of jealousy. She posted on social media about toxic family members and the importance of protecting children from manipulation. She told the children I was sick and couldn't see them anymore. "They're grieving you," my nephew reported after a family gathering I hadn't been invited to. "Sophie cried when your name came up. Marcus is angry, he thinks you chose to leave." The information was devastating. But it was also evidence. "Document everything," Patricia instructed. "Every lie she tells, every person who reports what the children are saying, every manipulation that reaches you. Build the case that shows exactly who's doing the alienating." David called once during the 6 months of legal proceedings. "Mom, please. Just drop this. You're tearing our family apart." "I'm tearing our family apart? You stood in my kitchen while your wife threatened to make my grandchildren forget me. You said nothing." Jessica was upset. She didn't mean. She meant every word. "She spent 8 years positioning herself to take my assets and control my access to your children. I have recordings, David. I have documentation. I have a lawyer who's seen this pattern 100 times. If you'd just give us the equity from the house, we could pay off our debts and everything would go back to normal." Normal? Normal was seeing my grandchildren every week. Normal was being part of their lives. You let Jessica take that away piece by piece, and now you want me to pay for the privilege of whatever crumbs she decides to allow. I took a breath, steadying myself. "I love you, David. I raised you better than this. But I won't let you and your wife destroy me financially because she can't manage money and you can't stand up to her." He hung up without responding. The financial picture that emerged during discovery was damning. Jessica had been hiding debts from David for years. Credit cards maxed out in both their names. A second mortgage he hadn't known about. Business loans for a consulting company that had never actually operated. They owed $340,000, with their house worth $380,000 and falling in a declining market. My house, the one Jessica wanted me to sign over, was their only path to solvency. If they could get the deed, they could sell it, pay their debts, and start over. They'd been willing to destroy my relationship with my grandchildren to make that happen. "This explains the urgency," Patricia observed. "They're about to lose everything. Your house was their escape plan. But threatening me, alienating the children, how did they think I'd ever agree? They thought you were a vulnerable elderly woman who would do anything to see her grandchildren. They underestimated you." The court hearing for grandparent visitation was the turning point. The judge reviewed the evidence: recordings of threats, documentation of alienation, testimony from family members about the children's distress, financial records showing the true motivation behind the ultimatum. Jessica's attorney tried to paint me as an interfering mother-in-law, but the recordings spoke for themselves. "Sign over the house or you'll never see your grandchildren again." The judge's expression hardened as he listened. "Mrs. Patterson," he addressed Jessica, "I've reviewed your communications and the timeline of your behavior toward your mother-in-law. You systematically reduced her contact with grandchildren she'd helped raise, then used those children as leverage for financial gain. I was protecting my family. You were exploiting your family. There's a difference." He turned to me. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm granting your petition for visitation rights. Every other Saturday, supervised initially until we can ensure the children's transition is handled appropriately." Jessica stood. "You can't force me to let her see my children. I can, and I am. Furthermore, I'm ordering a custody evaluation. When parents use children as weapons against grandparents who've committed no offense, it raises concerns about their judgment in other areas." The restraining order came later, after Jessica's response to losing the visitation hearing. She showed up at my house twice, screaming accusations from the driveway. She called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that alternated between threats and tearful pleas. She posted my address on social media, inviting anyone who wants to tell the switch what they think of her. Patricia documented everything and filed for a protective order. Stay 500 feet from my client's residence and place of worship. No contact by phone, email, social media, or through third parties. Any violation results in immediate arrest. The order was granted based on the pattern of harassment and the escalating nature of Jessica's behavior. David wasn't named in the order. He'd never personally threatened or harassed me, he just stood silent while his wife did. The distinction was legally meaningful, if not emotionally significant. Their financial collapse happened exactly as the records predicted. The second mortgage Jessica had hidden came due. The credit card companies filed lawsuits. The consulting company debts triggered personal guarantees David hadn't understood when he'd signed them. They lost their house in foreclosure. They lost their car to repossession. They lost everything except the children, who watched their parents' lives unravel with the confusion and fear that accompanies adult disasters. 6 months after the ultimatum in my kitchen, they appeared on my doorstep. The scene was almost pathetic. David looked exhausted, diminished, nothing like the confident young man I'd raised. Jessica looked furious, unable to accept the consequences of her own choices. "Mom," David started, "we need help. Just for a few months until we get back on our feet. We have nowhere else to go." "The kids need stability," Jessica added, apparently unaware of the irony. "You have room. It would only be temporary." I opened the door wider, and for a moment, hope flickered across their faces. Then I showed them the restraining order. "This document says you cannot come within 500 feet of my residence," I said to Jessica. "You're currently on my porch. I could call the police right now and have you arrested." "Eleanor, be reasonable." "I'm being completely reasonable. You threatened to take my grandchildren away unless I gave you my house. You told those children I abandoned them. You tried to destroy my relationship with them to extort money from me." I stepped back, hand on the door. "You chose to use my grandchildren as weapons. Now live with the consequences." "But the kids, where will they go?" "The children can stay with me temporarily, if the court approves. I've already discussed it with my attorney and Child Protective Services." "But you—" I looked at Jessica with something beyond anger, something closer to pity. "You're not welcome here. Not now. Not ever." I closed the door in their faces. The children came to live with me 3 weeks later. The court, already concerned about Jessica and David's judgment based on the custody evaluation, approved temporary placement with me while their parents stabilized their situation. Social workers had visited my home, reviewed my finances, and determined that I could provide the safe environment the children needed. Marcus and Sophie arrived with garbage bags of belongings, confused and frightened. "Grandma, Mom said you didn't want us anymore," Sophie whispered as I tucked her in that first night. "Your mom told you something that wasn't true. I've always wanted you. I fought very hard to see you when they wouldn't let me." Why would she lie? Sometimes adults make bad decisions because they're scared or angry. It doesn't make it right, but it's not your fault. I kissed her forehead. "You're safe here. I love you. That's what matters now." The temporary arrangement became permanent over the following year. David and Jessica's marriage collapsed under the weight of financial ruin and mutual recrimination. She blamed him for not controlling his mother. He blamed her for the debts she'd hidden. The divorce was bitter and protracted. Neither of them was in a position to provide stable housing for the children. Jessica moved in with her sister 3 states away. David rented a room in a boarding house, working 2 jobs to pay down debts that would take decades to clear. The children stayed with me. Full legal custody was granted 18 months after that confrontation on my porch. The court found that both parents had demonstrated poor judgment, financial instability, and willingness to use the children as pawns in adult conflicts. My home, the home Jessica had tried to take from me, became the children's permanent residence. David visits occasionally now. He's sober in a way he wasn't before, not from alcohol, but from the intoxication of Jessica's influence. Alone, he started to remember who he was before she reshaped him into her accomplice. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said during one visit, watching Marcus and Sophie play in the backyard. "I don't know how I let it get so bad. How I stood there while she threatened you. You chose her over your family. Over your children. Over basic decency. I know. I was wrong. Yes. You were." I let the words settle. "But you're still their father. They need you, a better version of you than the one who stood silent in my kitchen. Can you forgive me?" "I can try. Forgiveness takes time. Trust takes longer." I watched my grandchildren, healthy and happy in a stable home. What matters now is what you do going forward. Whether you become someone they can respect. And if I can't? Then they'll grow up knowing that at least one person in this family chose to protect them instead of use them. Jessica has no contact with the children. The court prohibited it after she violated the restraining order twice, then tried to abduct Sophie from school. She's facing criminal charges now, and the family court judge made clear that any parental rights she retained were being terminated. "She'll never stop," David warned me once. "She's convinced herself that you stole everything from her." "I stole nothing. I refuse to be robbed. There's a difference." "She doesn't see it that way. That's not my problem anymore. The children are safe. That's all that matters." Marcus and Sophie are teenagers now. Marcus, 16, is thoughtful and protective. He remembers more of those dark years than Sophie does, and he's made clear whose side he's on. Sophie, 14, is lighter, more forgiving, more willing to hope that people can change. Both of them understand what happened. Not because I poisoned them against their mother, I've been careful never to do that, but because they were old enough to remember the lies, the manipulation, the way they were used as bargaining chips. Mom told us you didn't love us, Marcus said once, looking at photos from before the estrangement. She said you chose money over family. What do you think now? I think she was describing herself, not you. He set down the photos. I think she told us what she was doing, and pretended you were the one doing it. That's a very insightful observation. I've had time to think about it. And I've watched you, Grandma. You didn't have to take us in. You didn't have to fight for us. You could have signed over the house and maybe gotten more peaceful visits. He paused. But you would have lost yourself. And eventually, you would have lost us anyway, because she would have found another reason to take us away. You're very wise for 16. I learned it from watching you. Watching what you survived. What you built afterward. The house Jessica tried to take remains my home. The same kitchen where she delivered her ultimatum now hosts homework sessions and family dinners. The same living room where I de-installed recording equipment now echoes with teenage laughter and video game debates. The same bedrooms where Harold and I raised David now shelter the next generation of our family. I'm 78 now, healthy enough to manage, with help from a part-time caregiver who's become like family. The children have friends, activities, stability, everything their parents' chaos had denied them. Sign over the house or never see your grandchildren again. Jessica had been so certain of her leverage. So confident that threatening my grandchildren would break me, that I'd surrender everything to maintain whatever crumbs of access she allowed. She'd miscalculated completely. I received a letter from Jessica last month, postmarked from the state where she's serving 18 months for the attempted abduction. It was 6 pages of justification, accusation, and self-pity. She blamed me for her divorce, her imprisonment, her estrangement from her children. She demanded that I tell Marcus and Sophie the truth about how I'd stolen them from their mother. I didn't show the children the letter. I filed it with my attorney, documentation for the next time she tries something. Some people never learn. Some patterns never change. Some threats never stop entirely. But I know who I am now. I know what I'm willing to fight for. And I know that the grandchildren sleeping safely in my home are proof that standing firm was the right choice. Sign over the house or never see your grandchildren again. I didn't sign. I see my grandchildren every day. And the woman who threatened me has nothing, not the house, not the children, not the family she tried to destroy. She chose to use them as weapons. Now she lives with the consequences. She slid the papers across my kitchen table with absolute confidence. Sign over the house or you'll never see your grandchildren again. My son stood behind her, silent. They thought I was a vulnerable old woman who would do anything to see Marcus and Sophie. They didn't know I'd been recording. They didn't know I had an attorney. They didn't know I'd been documenting their manipulation for 18 months. 6 months later, when their debts caught up and they needed somewhere to live, I showed them the restraining order instead of opening my door. You chose to use my grandchildren as weapons. Now live with the consequences. The children live with me now. They're safe, loved, and protected. And the daughter-in-law who tried to take everything? She has nothing left to threaten me with.